Good morning. Uh, it is Motivation Monday, March 10th, 4:34 a.m. And I was told that some of my recordings was like listen to NPR radio. That's a big compliment for me, since so I'm 54, coming on 55 in May, and I think about how exactly um did I get a lot of my information or my influence, um with opinion, whether it be political, religious, as such. And I'm not one to sit in front of a television and watch the news, but what I've always enjoyed is traveling, and whether, when I was young, um, on the bus, buses in Abilene, whether it's a school bus or uh, city link, public transportation, or hanging out with friends. Yeah, I was always a passenger until I started driving myself. And I really didn't drive in West Texas until I came back from the military, right? So, um, I was a late driver. Um, I didn't get I didn't get my driver's license until I was in the military, and I was 20. And so the the first moments of driving for me was in Florida, when I was stationed at Mayport, and having um, to drive in traffic. And what was calming for me was to listen to the radio. Um, First, a music station, and then, DJs commenting on everything Florida, right? And um, then later, I did the same thing in Norfolk, Virginia. Hence, the one of my favorite radio stations is like, we put the fuck in Norfolk. um, and and then later, uh, coming back to Texas, um, and doing it again. Um, this time going to work, and actually making some serious money, and listening to opinions on the radio. Um, I guess what I'm saying in all of this is, yeah, my opinion was always um, pretty much dictated in my travels, and always on the way to work. Um, Now, um, since I haven't really worked for a entity other than what I perceive, one that I made myself. And so, basically, I've been a veteran, no doubt, right? Just a veteran with health conditions. And so my perspective in a political climate, religious climate, has always just been a relationship um, with the Veterans Administration since 2008. Um, because that's who I had to check in with. Um, that's who showed interest in me by taking clinical notes. Um, and, you know, um, many different people. In the beginning, it was just pretty steady who I saw over a 5-year period. But once that person retired, the consistency waned because who I reported to changed over time. And um, and did I really change through all of that? Um, sure, my perspective changed, and it always involved who was close to me, who I was living with. And these days, since I've been living alone this past year, like completely alone without any pets. Um, you kind of wonder, for someone like me, I kind of wonder uh what what really influences me, and how does that perspective of mine, what what is really going on in the brain, right? um so I'm surrounded by books and book stacks everywhere, and I kind of, you know I know I started, talking into a mic uh, through my love with music, and then um spending some time on LinkedIn, and um, so many people promoting their books and such. What exactly is so fascinating about books. So this is one I just picked up, right? Because I like the cover. It's called Mirroring People, Mirroring, the science of empathy and how we connect with others. Marco Acaboni, Iacoboni. And there's just this, me, I just flip a book open. me, I don't know why I do it. It just works for me. But this is coming out of the chapter of mirroring, wanting, and liking, and the effects of negative ads. Some NPR stuff, right? In the spring of 2004, we started a new experiment measuring brain activity in the partisan brain, while registered Democrats and Republicans watched a series of pictures of the 3 presidential candidates that year: incumbent Republican President George W. Bush, Democrat John Kerry, and the independent Ralph Nader. We scanned approximately half of the 20 subjects in the spring after Kerry's victories in the primaries made his nomination a foregone conclusion. Getting wind of this study, the New York Times reported John Tierney, no, this New York Times reporter, John Tierney, Tierney, interviewed me. His front page article on the experiment, published on April 19th, was titled Politics in the Brain. Suddenly, our imaging experiment became probably the most media covered brain study ever. Major TV networks picked up the story. This was all astonishing because we had not even finished the experiment. Shades of, in quotes, instant science, exclamation mark. Media coverage for a scientist is generally a good thing. It means that the experiments we do are interesting to the population at large, and that an understanding of what we do does not require a PhD in neuroscience. In the lab at UCLA, we were indeed pleased by the attention in this case. However, we did not realize that a high profile story can be a double edged sword. Naive, I realize. Indeed, the coverage made it basically impossible to recruit new subjects who did not know about the experiment and, most important, did not know about the results of our preliminary analysis, which was reported in Tierney's article in the New York Times. This was a major problem relating to what we call metacognitive processes. Simply put, the subject's prior knowledge would screw things up for this experiment. What could we do? Wait, stop recruiting subjects for a while. People do not have long term memory for these kinds of things, and the media would be feeding them a never ending series of new stories and new topics to debate. There is no shortage. The supply seems infinite. We thought that by stopping recruiting for about 3 months, we could effectively solve our metacognition problem. Indeed, when we resumed our experiment in the summer, people had basically forgotten what had been reported. At best, they had vague memories about some kind of brain experiment at UCLA. During the summer, with the election approaching, media interest picked up again, but I had learned my lesson. This time, I stipulated an agreement with all media outlets who wanted to interview me. They would not run the story until we had completed our data collection, which we did in early September. At this point, the experiment as originally planned was completed, with the peculiarity that approximately half of the subjects had been studied in the early spring and the remaining half in the late summer. In this study, our subjects were not only registered Democrats or Republicans, they had also made up their minds about the election, not surprisingly, since this was one of the most polarized presidential elections in American history. Such partisans are able to look at the very same data and reach completely opposite conclusions. This we all know. But how do they do it? This we do not know, or did not during the experiment. We hope to help answer the question by using very simple stimuli, the faces of the three candidates, with the hope of minimizing the complex factors that may be at play during a political debate and reaching the core of the feeling of affiliation with a party and a candidate. My main hypothesis was the feelings of empathy and identification for your own candidate may be supported by activity in mirror neuron areas or by super mirror neurons. In the subject studied in the spring, the brain activity we observed was right in line with our own main hypothesis. While watching their own candidate, both Democrats and Republicans activated the medial orbital frontal cortex. As we know, this brain area is typically activated by rewarding stimuli, for instance, one's favorite food. Our candidates were people, not inanimate food, but this brain area is also associated with positive emotions such as happiness. Watching one's own candidate is obviously associated with positive feelings. Most important are depth electrode recordings in the epileptic patients described in Chapter 7 suggests that in this brain area there are supramirror neurons. Therefore, the neural activity observed in this region was consistent with the hypothesis that watching one's own candidate would elicit feelings of empathy and identification through the mirror neuron system. So far, so good. To our vast surprise, however, the subjects we studied in the late summer did not show the medial orbital frontal activity while watching their own candidates. How is this possible? We looked at the data very carefully, but the numbers refused to change. The only reliable difference between the brain responses of the early spring and the late summer subjects was indeed in this one region, the medial orbital frontal cortex. It was activated in the spring, dormant in the late summer. This deactivation suggested not that it simply failed to activate, but rather that an active process of shutting down this region was going on in the late summer subjects while they were watching the pictures of the candidates they planned to vote for. I believe this dramatic change in the medial orbital frontal cortex in the late summer subjects was due to the change in the political climate and the heavy use of negative ads and personal attacks with which both sides had pummeled the opponent throughout the summer. In such a toxic climate, how could you possibly identify and empathize with your own candidate even though he would still receive your vote? It was almost impossible. The campaign had tainted all of the candidates, even for their partisan supporters. Obviously, this interpretation is entirely post hoc. However, if we consider what was going on in that campaign and what we know about the medial orbital frontal cortex, my explanation is reasonable. And if it is correct, I believe this is bad news for our society. It obviously shows that negative ads work. No news to political consultants. And it also shows that negative ads can create a dangerous emotional disconnect between voters and the leaders who should represent them. A healthy democracy, in my opinion, needs mechanisms of empathy and identification between the people and their political representatives. Without these unifying emotions, we run the risk of an ever growing disenchantment with the political system that may make people more receptive to other forms of government. And thus far, the alternatives to the modern democracies have proved to be much worse than what we have now. Whew. So I guess that is a little NPR. uh, yeah, and I'm going long. Um, um, just just coming out a very high strung election process, and I know like last year, coming in it, um, you know, I was looking at the my political opinion through the lens of the VA administration, right? And because that was really the only form of government that was affecting my daily life. How I was getting my health care, and programs were coming, um, were being created. However, um, I didn't feel uh, that even this one particular program I thought was going to be. I was like, wow, they finally did it, but they really didn't do anything. Um, I just felt a lot of people got employed and they really didn't know what those letters meant other than wearing a rainbow, you know, other than doing, wearing the rainbow pins and doing the marketing for it, right? I so that's just my opinion, you know, being one of those letters. And then I had to really look at, okay, if I'm truly a letter in that certain alphabet, why why does my opinion still not matter, right? It did concerning pronouns. Um, it did concerning about, you know, how I was to be called, but in essence, I wasn't truly that letter, um, because it wasn't going to happen, right? Whether it was a program or not. Um, so, I just, yeah, even though everything said one thing, I was still a woman without a uterus and ovaries. Get it? There was not a transformation. Um, not at least not in the VA. You know, healthcare in community. You know, I was respected more. You know, just for being who I am. But that's just because these clinics knew me. One particular ear, nose, and throat, saw me every week. So they just knew me as Costello. And that's all that really came of it, you know. So there, I created an identity as Costello, and that's okay. You know, um, with that lens, because that's how I was coming into it, right? And they did not know me as Louisa. So, but my life trickled in. But the thing is, um, when you're dealing with staff and healthcare, you're pretty limited with how you interact. And so it's just like little conversations, and it became the love of Costello, right? What is Costello love? And I love them. I love the staff of that clinic, and I provided feedback as much as possible. And through that feedback, I established a relationship. And there's probably only that one clinic who knows the love of Costello, right? As I got my allergy shots every week. And I'm coming into the third year, right? So, um, and I take that into the recovery process because it's pretty true. Um, it's my persona, and you're either going to love it or you're either going to hate it in the recovery process, um, based on your perspective. Um, there's nothing I can do about it. I thought I could, but going back to this experiment, I do not know what negative ads were going on. Get it? I have no idea. Yeah. And because that's your perspective. So I don't know what the hell's going on in your head. I just know what's going on in mine. And that is the world that I live in. My perspective. And I just told you a little bit about it. But, you know, are you going to make it all the way through the are you going to make it all the way through this 30 minutes? Uh, Probably not, unless you're interested in me as a person, right? Yeah. Yeah. If it's 27 minutes now, and I'm about to close out at 30. Yeah, because this is really a deeper meditative exercise. Like, can you stick with me for 30 minutes if there's no gain for you other than taking in information, right? I mean, do we, as people, why do we stick with something if it's just knowledge? There's got to be some kind of benefit here, right, for you, you know. Now for me, I'm just making it. Because why? Because I'm going to be my biggest fan. I'm going to listen to this later at those moments when I feel disconnected, right? Just to know that I made a timestamp about this feeling that I have, um, getting a bad rap, feeling that I get a bad rap, feeling, in suspiciousness that I'm getting some negative ads, but I don't know, right? I really don't know what people think of me. Um, And you really don't know until you do something consistently, like chairing a meeting, right? Um, so that's it for NPR, right? And the topic of negative ads and how people perceive each other. And hopefully I grow past that and not listen to the negative ads on other people. Hopefully, I learned something in perspective. That being said, peace out.